Good morning, bon dia, and thank you for having me here today. It is truly a pleasure to be with all of you, and actually symbolically, this is actually the first time I'm physically attending an event since the state of alarm was declared in Spain in March. So it's an honor actually to be here. I have been with IATA for over 15 years now, and much more than that, working actually on this amazing industry. But COVID-19 crisis unfortunately goes beyond everything we have ever experienced, including 9/11 or the latest financial crisis. Thanks to technology, we have been able to work from home and handle the crisis situation as best we could. But technology does have its limit, not just because of repeatedly hearing, sorry, I was on mute, or can everyone see my screen when we were using Teams or Zoom sessions, but most importantly, because we need the human touch at the office, but also in our personal lives. Millions of people around the world are desperate today to actually be able to see their loved ones, something that many of us have not been able to do since the beginning of the crisis. Aviation is the business of freedom, and COVID-19 has unfortunately jeopardized both business and freedom. We have been working nonstop to reverse this situation and solving the numerous complex equations that have arisen from this crisis, including restarting an industry that was at a standstill only a few months ago. Nearly 8 months into this crisis in Europe, the situation is still extremely worrying on the ground and in the air. I look forward to the panel later with my industry colleagues, where we will have the opportunity to share views, opinions, and experiences on the challenges we are facing. To give you an idea, actually, of this in numbers, according to Eurocontrol data, last October 14th, in 2019, right, there were 32,332 flights in the sky. If we compare to the past October 14 of 2020, there were only 13,540 flights, which is 60%, almost a 60% lower comparably, right? And the current numbers are actually similar to the early July, when some European borders started to open. On a more positive note, domestic travel is picking up in some markets, like Turkey, for example, or obviously in some Asian markets as well, leaving proof that people actually do want to fly, but it's clearly not enough to sustain actually our industry, particularly with the second wave of infections that is currently sweeping Europe. We certainly hope vaccines will be available soon to help fight this virus, and aviation will be key in transporting this around the globe. In the meantime, IATA Executive Office, for example, in Geneva, had to be temporarily closed actually yesterday, and colleagues advised to be work remotely again. And in my case, coming from Madrid, my team and I needed actually derogations to leave the region to attend this fantastic event in person due to travel restrictions. Portugal did very good in a job handling the first wave of COVID-19 infections back in March and early spring, and I really hope that it will be able to weather this second wave in the same way. Prime Minister Costa and his government did well looking at the situation in Italy and Spain to avoid repeating the same mistakes committed in both countries. Learning, exchanging information, and working together in a coordinated manner as an international community, combining transport and health experts, is absolutely essential to tackle this global pandemic from a health perspective, but not only. Ever since the crisis started, we have not stopped relentlessly calling for harmonized measures. And I think my predecessors in today's speeches said something on the similar fashion. Unfortunately, most often in vain, the absence of harmonization has impeded a successful industry takeoff. Quarantines, border closures, and hasty decisions hinder proper planning for potential travelers, as well as the entire air transport ecosystem. Quite understandably, no one wants to face quarantines at their destinations or upon their return, or not being able to fly back home due to untimely and surprise border closures. or have to undergo actually multiple expensive PCR tests, both prior to departure and upon arrival. This can represent even a bigger budget than the actual airfare, particularly if your entire family is traveling. Safety is the industry #1 priority, and this crisis has shown that airlines and the entire value chain have done the job. With one case for every 27 million travelers on average, flying remains the safest means of transport ever, during these pandemic times. The surveys are there to testify that people do want to fly. Governments need to give them the possibility to do it and thus refrain from taking counterproductive measures. Since flying itself is not the issue, what governments can do is replace border closures with quick, affordable, and widespread antigen tests. And this would offer perfectly valid alternatives and deter the fear of importing COVID cases. This fear has often stimulated governments to act or react independently, creating a patchwork of measures. For this reason, IATA and Airport Councils International reiterates the urgent call for governments to use testing as a means to safely reopen borders and reestablish global connectivity. Some efforts were made at EU level on travel restrictions, including the use of common color code system, which European Affairs ministers recommended adopting last week. Together with Airlines for Europe and ACI Europe, or the airports, we believe it is a failure and have issues at stark warning at the potential consequences. The recommendations falls far short of what it was supposed to deliver, encouraging a restart travel through effective coordination and proportionate, predictable, and non-discriminatory measures. Restoring confidence at both passenger and government levels is key as the industry's financial situation continues to deteriorate. Airlines have spent much of 2020 reducing fixed costs everywhere they could, but demand is too low to make up for the lost revenue. Despite the government financial aid granted in most part last spring, numbers continue to be in red, with no major improvements in sight and a much less possible off-season ahead, which in 2020 will not be counterbalanced by the summer season when airlines have to make their profits. According to our early October estimations, the airline industry will burn through $77 billion in cash during the second half of 2020, almost $13 billion per month or $300,000 per minute, despite the limited restart of operations. In most markets, state aid provided at early stages of the crisis must be replaced or extended. To avoid the destruction of jobs and both economic and social opportunities, we need an appropriate financial and operational framework to operate and reverse the negative trend. The crisis is threatening some 4.8 million jobs in aviation. The rupture in global air connectivity puts at risk a further 41.2 million jobs across the travel and tourism sectors. Tourism is critical, it's a critical engine in Europe, in the overall economy, and even more in countries such as Portugal, Spain, France, Greece, and Italy, to name a few. And that is not even counting the impact on trade and other cross-border businesses that cannot function normally without the connectivity provided by aviation. Despite the current turmoil, airlines have not abandoned their commitment for a greener and more sustainable present and future. The European Green Deal, which seeks to make Europe climate neutral by 2050, will set the framework at EU level for the years to come. We cannot stress enough that more environmental taxes are not viable solution, unlike carbon offsetting, sustainable fuels, and green technology. It is with great interest and a hint of jealousy that airlines are seeing the current boom in electric cars, for example. Unfortunately, seeing a large electric power aircraft in the sky flown again, as I said, solely on electricity, is still over a decade away. But we certainly hope manufacturers will be able to make this dream a reality as soon as it's physically possible, and same, obviously, for hydrogen. In the meantime, in the greater context of protecting the environment, perhaps the single most promising solution today are sustainable aviation fuels. The industry sticks to its commitment to increasing their use, and even in these difficult times. Less than a year ago, IATA held a workshop on sustainable aviation fuel here in Portugal, in Lisbon actually, with a wider range of Portuguese stakeholders, from producers to regulators, airlines to government entities. For what we were able to perceive in Portugal, like in many other countries, there is both great interest and potential in making sustainable aviation fuel an important component in environmental policy. The next step in setting the right framework, the Renewable Energy Directive 2, on the promotion of the use of energy for renewable sources, is a good idea, particularly because it allows for further increases in ambitions on how fuels are treated, and in the coming decades, a key time for shaping the European economies of the future. We need to pursue a rapid and global energy transition away from fossil fuels and towards sustainable sources of energy, some of which are technologically mature but need massive scaling up. Others, such as fuels produced from green electricity, are at the start of their journey from initial development into our wings. Aviation must survive whatever it takes. We need to multiply dialogues with both the EU institutions and governments all across our region to ensure it does. Portugal has a decisive leadership role to play here, as it will hold the presidency of the Council of the European Union starting next January 1st. One of the critical issues that must be tackled by this upcoming presidency is the much-needed revision of Regulation EU 261 on passenger rights, which never contemplated the eventuality of a pandemic. It is inadequately, in such a circumstances, completely turned the industry upside down. With closed borders and canceled flights becoming the norm, passengers sought reimbursement from airlines and travel agencies, which by them were already bleeding cash and struggling for survival. The quest for a greener planet and air transport industry must be addressed collectively. We also call on the Portuguese presidency to give a strong push to the Single European Sky 2+ file, which has been in deadlock for too long, as well as the Renewable Fuels for Europe initiative, also referred to as Refuel. We very much look forward to working in partnership with the Portuguese authorities on these topics. Let us ensure together that aviation continues to benefit society and economies alike and remain the business of freedom. Thank you very much.